They said the train only brought good supplies and strangers with hollow eyes. But that winter morning it carried something else, something everyone in town pretended not to see. A woman stepped down from the last car. Her shawl clung to her shoulders, torn at the edges, as if it too had endured a long journey of being overlooked. She was no longer young, no longer the kind of bride men placed wagers over. 50 years had shaped her face with lines of sorrow and endurance, the kind only life itself could carve. And in her eyes, wet with tears, yet burning with something unbroken, there was a story no one asked to hear. The townsfolk whispered, "Why would anyone send for her? Who would want her now?" They turned away, dismissing her scars, both the ones seen and the ones hidden. But one man did not turn. From the edge of the platform, a cowboy stepped forward, his boots heavy with dust, his eyes shadowed by years of silence. When he saw her, he didn't flinch, didn't laugh, didn't look away. Instead, he said in a voice steady as the earth itself, "You don't have to hide your scars from me." It was not a promise of rescue, not a declaration of love, just an offering of something rarer in the West than gold: acceptance. But what happens when two wounded souls try to build a life out of ashes? Can scars really become the map that leads to healing? Or will the past, those who mocked her, those who tried to break her, come riding back determined to shatter the fragile peace she has just begun to taste? This is not a tale of youth and beauty, but of resilience, dignity, and late-blooming love. A story for anyone who has ever been told it was too late, only to discover the heart does not keep time the way the world does. Will the cowboy's quiet strength be enough to hold the weight of her past? And will she finally learn that scars are not shame, but proof she survived? The year was 1876 in a small Wyoming town where the wind always seemed to carry secrets across the wide empty plains. The train hissed into the station, its wheels screaming like something that wanted to stop but didn't know how. People bustled about, hugging loved ones, unloading crates, hurting children. Among the crowd stepped down a woman, Eleanor Hayes, nearly 50, her bonnet tilted low to hide more than just her age. Her hands clutched a worn carpet bag, the kind of bag that carried not just clothes but memories too heavy to unpack. She moved slowly, carefully, as if each step might betray her. The wide brim of her bonnet shadowed her face, but nothing could hide the shine of fresh tears slipping down her cheeks. Eleanor wasn't the kind of bride the town expected. She wasn't young, she wasn't fresh-faced with ringlets and ribbons. Life had written its story across her skin, lines of sorrow around her mouth, faint scars near her temple calluses that spoke of years of work. Her body, fuller and heavier than the girls who usually came west, carried not shame, but the quiet dignity of survival. Still, she felt the stares, the whispers, the unspoken words of a world that had told her too many times she was too much of everything and not enough of the things that mattered. Standing apart from the crowd was Thomas, a rancher of 53, tall and broad-shouldered with eyes the color of dark cedar wood. His hat rested low, his stance steady as the mountains beyond. He had been waiting not just for the train, not just for this woman, but for something he barely dared to name. When Eleanor's eyes lifted just enough to meet his, she almost turned away. She thought, surely he'll see the flaws. Surely he'll regret this the moment he lays eyes on me. The old wounds inside her whispered louder than the train's whistle. But Thomas stepped forward, his boots steady against the wooden planks of the platform. He took her bag without asking, not as a demand but as a quiet offering. He looked at her, really looked, not at the scars, not at the weight of her body, but at the weary courage in her face. His voice, deep and even, carried just enough to reach her. "You don't have to hide your scars from me." The words struck her like a hand laid gently on an old wound, not to press but to soothe. For years she had hidden, stitched herself into silence, taught her heart to shrink. And now a stranger told her she could be seen fully without shame. The town blurred around her. The noise of vendors and wagons dimmed. For one fragile moment, Eleanor let herself breathe. Yet deep inside, fear still clenched its fists. Could she trust this man? Could she believe that kindness wasn't just another mask? The train's smoke curled into the sky, and Eleanor felt her past pressing hard against the promise of this beginning. And so beneath the wide Wyoming sky, two souls, both marked, both waiting, took the first uncertain step toward each other. But would the wounds they carried bind them together or break them apart? The wagon rolled slow across the barren stretch of Wyoming land, wheels groaning, as though they too carried the weight of unspoken things. Eleanor Hayes sat upright beside Thomas, hands folded tight in her lap, clutching the hem of her skirt as though it might hold her steady. The prairie wind pulled at loose strands of her graying hair. She dared not speak, afraid her voice would break whatever fragile bridge had formed back at the station. Instead, she listened to the creak of leather reins in his hand, to the steady rhythm of hooves striking frozen earth, to the silence between them that felt less like emptiness and more like an unfinished sentence. His cabin appeared near dusk, rising against the slope of a hill where the land bent into shadow. It was not much to look at. One room, a porch worn by years of storms, smoke curling soft from the chimney. Yet when Eleanor stepped down from the wagon, the earth firm beneath her boots, she felt something stir, the faintest whisper of shelter. Inside the cabin bore no ornaments of pride. A stove squatted in the corner, blackened with use. A wooden table scarred by knives and weather stood steady near the window. A Bible rested on a shelf, its spine cracked from years of thumbing. A single rocking chair faced the fire. "You'll take the bed," Thomas said simply, his voice deep as low thunder. "I sleep out in the barn most nights anyway." Eleanor shook her head quickly. "I couldn't," but his look was quiet, final, not unkind. He wasn't giving her charity. He was offering respect. It had been years, decades, even since anyone had given her that. Her fingers trembled as she unpacked the few things she owned: a folded dress, a comb with missing teeth, a worn Bible that had once belonged to her mother. When she reached for the pot on the stove, instinct moved her hands. Soon the smell of beans and cornmeal rose into the air, thin but warm. She stirred, tasting carefully, heart pounding, with the old fear of not being enough. When the food was ready, she set the table for one. But Thomas, entering from the barn, nodded at the empty space. "Sit too." For a long breath, she stood frozen, her hand still on the chair. But then, almost against her will, she obeyed. They ate in silence, spoon by spoon. The fire crackled. Wind rattled against the shutters. And yet the quiet felt softer than anything Eleanor had known in years. Softer than the sharp words of her past, gentler than the loneliness that had once cut her in two. When she rose to clear the table, she found another quilt folded at the foot of the bed, a stitched thing uneven but made with care. She paused, fingers brushing the rough edges, and for the first time in years her chest ached, not from grief, but from something startlingly close to hope. That night Eleanor lay awake, staring at the ceiling beams. The snow outside whispered against the roof, and from the barn came the distant sound of Thomas moving hay for the horses. Her hands clutched the quilt to her chest. A strange thought came uninvited. Perhaps this is not the end of my story. Perhaps it is a beginning. But beginnings are fragile. Could two people, both scarred by silence and loss, truly learn to trust the warmth stirring between them? The days stretched into a rhythm steady as the swing of an axe or the stirring of a stew. Eleanor Hayes rose each morning before the frost lifted, sweeping the hearth, baking biscuits that too often burned, but still filled the room with a smell she once thought belonged only to other women's homes. Thomas worked outside, chopping wood, tending to horses, fixing a broken fence board with silent precision. There was comfort in this pattern, yet comfort has a way of making hidden wounds restless. One afternoon, as Eleanor walked back from the well, a wagon pulled into the yard. It was Clara Whitfield, the storekeeper's wife, thin as wire and sharp as vinegar. She stepped down with a basket in hand, her eyes sweeping Eleanor from bonnet to boots. "Well," Clara said, lips curving, "I see the rumors were true. A mail-order bride, is it? At your age?" The words stung more than Eleanor wanted to admit. She kept her voice calm. "I'm here to cook and keep house." Clara sniffed. "Is that what you call it? Folks in town say no man takes in a woman without expecting more, especially one who's been passed over." Eleanor froze, the old shame pressing down like a hand on her chest. Passed over. Too plain, too barren, too old. The words echoed from decades past, whispered by family, by neighbors, by the man who once left her in silence without even goodbye. Before she could speak, Thomas appeared from the barn's shoulders, broad beneath his coat. His gaze locked on Clara, voice low as an axe splitting wood. "That's enough." Clara gave a brittle laugh. "I meant no offense, Mr. Calder. Just concerned." "You're done." The edge in his tone cut sharper than any blade. Clara bristled, muttered something about good luck, and climbed back into her wagon. When she was gone, Eleanor stood stiff near the bucket, hands trembling. She didn't look at Thomas. Didn't dare. The shame was hers, not his. That evening, as she scrubbed the table until her knuckles burned, Thomas sat quiet at the chair watching her. Finally, he spoke. "You don't have to listen to them." Her throat tightened. "I've heard worse." His gaze held hers steady. "You didn't deserve it then. You don't deserve it now." The words struck like a match in the dark. Yet matches burn out quick, and fear lingers longer. Eleanor turned away, afraid he might see what those words did to her heart, afraid she might believe them. That night, when the fire burned low and the silence pressed heavy, she found herself staring at the satchel tucked beneath the bed. The thought came sharp and cruel. Perhaps I should leave before I ruin whatever peace he has here. But her hands clutched the quilt he'd left for her, and the tears came soft and silent, soaking the fabric that smelled faintly of cedar and smoke. When shame and kindness collide, which one lingers longer in a scarred heart? The morning after Clara's words still clung to the air like wood smoke, Eleanor Hayes rose before dawn. She moved quietly, her steps careful as though she were a guest trespassing in someone else's house. She boiled water for tea, her fingers trembling slightly as she set the tin cup on the table. Her eyes drifted to the satchel beneath the cot. It was not packed, but the thought of filling it pressed on her like a weight. She had left places before her father's farm when he married her off to a man she did not love, the home where bruises had become part of the walls, the town where whispers followed her like a shadow. Leaving was survival, and she had learned survival well. When Thomas came in from the barn, snow dusting his shoulders, she forced a smile. "There's tea?" He nodded, but his eyes lingered on her face, on the faint redness around her lids that even the dim morning light could not hide. He took the cup, and for a long while neither spoke. Finally, his voice came low. "You're thinking of leaving?" Her breath caught. She looked down at her hands, rough and reddened from scrubbing. "I don't belong here, Thomas. Folks in town already talk. And I don't want to shame you." His jaw tightened, not with anger, but with something heavier. He set the cup down, the sound gentle against the wood. "Eleanor," he said, her name carrying a weight she hadn't heard in years. "Peace isn't peace if it can't hold pain too. I didn't bring you here to be perfect. I brought you here because—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "Because the silence was louder than I could stand. And with you, it's different." Her eyes blurred, not with shame this time, but with a trembling she couldn't control. Still, the voice inside her whispered, "You'll ruin this too. You always do." That evening, she took the satchel in her hands, folded in a biscuit, a blanket, a stitched note she had written on a scrap of paper. "Thank you for letting me be warm." When she opened the door, the wind rushed in sharp with winter. But Thomas was already there, standing on the porch, coat on, arms crossed. "You leaving?" His voice was steady, but his eyes, those steady storm-colored eyes, searched hers like a man bracing for a blow. "I don't belong here," she whispered. He looked at the satchel, then back at her. "You think you belonged in that town?" She didn't answer. The silence stretched. Finally, he stepped aside, making room for her to walk past. "Go if you want, but I'd rather you didn't." Her hand tightened on the satchel strap. The wind howled between them, and then, like a thread snapping, her shoulders sagged. She dropped the satchel on the floor. For the first time since she arrived, Eleanor let herself breathe. What if the first step to belonging isn't leaving or staying, but letting someone see you wrestle with the choice? The night after the satchel fell from her hands, Eleanor Hayes sat by the hearth, staring into the restless flames. The firelight painted her face in shifting golden shadow, as if even it was unsure whether she belonged. Thomas Reed busied himself with the small tasks of evening, placing wood by the stove, checking the latch on the window, brushing the snow from his boots. He moved quietly, but not with the cold distance of a man avoiding her. More like a man gathering courage piece by piece. When at last he sat across from her, the silence thickened. The only sound was the crackle of pine burning slow. Eleanor broke at first, her voice thin but steady. "You said peace isn't peace if it can't hold pain. Do you really believe that, Thomas? Or were you just saying it to stop me walking out that door?" His eyes lifted steady and clear, though his hands fidgeted against his knees. "I meant it. Every word. She looked back at the fire. I've carried so much shame. It follows me like a shadow. I thought if I kept moving, maybe it couldn't catch me. Thomas leaned forward, elbows on his knees. His voice came low, careful as if he feared breaking something fragile. Eleanor, scars don't make you shameful. They make you real. And I'd rather share silence with someone real than spend another year alone with ghosts. Her chest ached at his words. She wanted to believe him, wanted to let them seep into the cracks inside her. But fear clawed still. You don't know everything. If you did, you might not say that. He nodded slowly as though accepting her truth without trying to change it. Then let me learn. Not all at once. Not by force. But if you'll let me, I'll sit with what hurts until you're ready. Tears slipped from her eyes before she could stop them. For so long, every man she had known had demanded something of her: obedience, silence, perfection. And here was one who asked only to stay, even if it meant sitting with her pain. She whispered almost too softly to hear, I don't know how to be wanted. Thomas's voice was rough now, thick with something unspoken. You don't have to know. You just have to let me want you. The words fell into the room like a key turning in a long locked door. Something inside her gave way, not all at once, not neatly, but enough for her to breathe differently, deeper. For the first time in years, she did not feel like she had to hide her scars. That night when the fire sank to embers, she didn't curl on the cot alone. She sat in the rocking chair, mending one of his worn shirts. Her hands shook at first, but soon steadied, guided by muscle memory and something gentler. Thomas stood at the doorway, watching her quietly. He didn't move closer, didn't disturb the moment. But in his stillness was an unspoken vow. He would be there, steady as the land itself, if she ever reached for him. Outside, the snow fell in silence, softening every sharp edge of the world. Inside, a different kind of softening had begun. What if healing doesn't begin with forgetting the scars, but with being seen and loved in spite of them? The thaw of late winter came slow to the plains. Snow still clung stubbornly to fence posts and shadows, but the air carried the faint promise of change like a whispered hymn beneath the wind. For Eleanor Hayes, each morning now carried a rhythm she hadn't known in years. She swept the hearth-baked biscuits that rose a little taller each time, and mended Thomas's shirts by the window where the sun broke through. These small things, ordinary to most, felt like stitches, pulling torn fabric back together. But shadows never disappear quietly. They linger, waiting for the moment to be remembered. It was nearly dusk when a knock came at the cabin door. Not the polite tap of a neighbor, nor the hurried rap of a messenger. This knock was sharp, demanding. Thomas's jaw tightened as he set down his tools. Eleanor, drying her hands, froze at the basin. When Thomas opened the door, a man stepped into the fading light. Tall, sharp-featured, with a smile that cut rather than warmed. His coat was finer than any rancher's boots, polished despite the mud. Evening, he drawled. His eyes slid past Thomas and landed squarely on Eleanor. She felt her stomach drop, as though the years collapsed in a single breath. Jonah, she whispered. It was her late husband's younger brother. A man who had once mocked her tears, who had said she was too old to matter when she begged for mercy. He should have been far away back east or buried by now. But here he stood smug and alive. Well, well, Jonah said, tilting his head. Didn't expect to find you tucked away in the hills. Heard rumors, but I had to see for myself. The preacher's widow, playing house with a rancher. Thomas's stance shifted, broad and quiet as the land itself. State your business. Jonah smirked. Business. My brother's widow is my business. Law says a woman without kin belongs under family care. She's still tied to my bloodline, which means she's mine to claim. Eleanor's breath came shallow. She remembered the sneer, the jeers, the nights when Jonah and his friends had laughed while her husband treated her like property. She had escaped that world through widowhood, a cruel deliverance, but a deliverance nonetheless. Now it threatened to coil around her again. Thomas's voice was steady but low with warning. She doesn't belong to anyone, least of all you. Jonah laughed, a hollow sound. Oh, I see. You think she belongs to you. Bought her at auction, didn't you? That makes you better than me. Thomas's eyes narrowed, but he didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he turned to Eleanor. Do you want him here? The question stunned her. No man had ever asked her what she wanted, not once in all her 50 years. Her lips trembled. No. Thomas nodded once, firm and final. Then he faced Jonah. You heard her? Now leave. Jonah's smile thinned. This isn't over. You can't change what the world thinks of her. She'll always be the woman left behind, the woman bought cheap. He tipped his hat with mockery, then turned back toward the darkening road. Silence fell heavy after he left. Eleanor gripped the edge of the table until her knuckles whitened. He's right, she whispered. No matter what I do, that's how they'll see me. Broken. Bargained for. Thomas stepped closer, his presence calm as steady ground. I don't give a damn how they see you. I see you. That's enough. Her eyes lifted, meeting his. For the first time, she felt the words settle deep like roots taking hold. Still fear clawed at her chest. But what if it ruins your peace? What if I bring all that shame to your door? He placed his hand flat against the table, inches from hers. Peace isn't the absence of storms, Eleanor. It's having someone to stand beside when the winds come. Her throat tightened, tears burning hot. Slowly, she placed her hand over his. Not hiding her scars, not masking her trembling, simply placing trust in the open. In that moment, she chose. Not to run, not to hide, but to stand. That night, the cabin felt different. Not safer danger still lingered beyond the hills, but truer. Thomas read quietly by the fire, his presence a steady heartbeat in the silence. Eleanor sewed by the lamplight, her hands sure, even as her chest still ached. She had lived so long with the weight of being unwanted. Now, for the first time, she realized she could choose to be wanted by someone who had already chosen her first. Outside, the thaw crept further into the land. Ice loosened on the creek, and birds began to test their voices again. Change was coming, fragile but undeniable. What if the truest choice in life isn't about escaping the past, but about deciding who you will stand beside when it tries to return? Spring unfolded across the plains like a hymn long forgotten, but finally remembered. The thaw gave way to green shoots, lambs stumbling after their mothers, and mornings filled with the smell of fresh earth. For Eleanor Hayes, each sunrise no longer felt like a burden to endure, but a gift quietly handed to her. She had known hunger, loneliness, and the sting of words meant to diminish her. Yet now she found herself mending fences with Thomas, planting seeds by his side, and laughing softly at small things, the tilt of a calf's head, the stubborn crow of a rooster. But it wasn't the chores or the rhythm of ranch life that healed her most. It was the knowing she was no longer invisible. One evening, as twilight settled like lavender mist across the valley, Thomas placed something small in her hand. It was a plain gold band worn smooth with time. Her heart stuttered. Thomas. He cleared his throat, awkward, but earnest. I don't offer riches, just a name and a place where you're wanted, not for what you can do or what you've lost. Just you. Tears blurred her vision, spilling freely, but for once they were not born of sorrow. She had been traded, mocked, left behind. Now she was being chosen. Eleanor slipped the ring onto her finger, her hands trembling. She whispered, I thought my story was over. Thomas shook his head gently. No, Eleanor. It's only changing chapters. In the quiet of that moment, surrounded by the soft hum of crickets and the far-off howl of coyotes, she felt something she had not dared to name in years: hope. Not the fragile hope of a young bride, but the steady, deep-rooted hope of a woman who had survived the storm and still found spring waiting on the other side. She rested her head on his shoulder, and together they watched the stars bloom over the wild, endless west. Because sometimes love doesn't come early, loud, or easy. Sometimes it arrives late, quiet, and strong enough to hold everything you are. In the end, the scars she once tried to hide became the very bridges that drew them closer. What the world called broken, he called beautiful. What others dismissed as weakness, he honored as survival. And together they discovered something rare. Love not born of youth or perfection, but of patience, kindness, and the quiet courage to begin again. Life often tells us we are too late, too old to change, too marked by pain, too forgotten to be chosen. But stories like this remind us that healing can happen at any age, and that sometimes the very scars we fear make us unworthy are the proof we are strong enough to love deeply. So perhaps the question isn't whether we carry scars, but whether we dare to share them, and in doing so allow others to share theirs too. because love that accepts the whole story of who we are is the kind that truly lasts. If this story touched your heart, I'd invite you to stay with us here at None, Wild West Saga. Subscribe, share, and let these stories of resilience and late blooming love remind us all that hope never ages. And now I'd love to hear from you. Would you like to see a continuation of their journey, or perhaps more stories of women and men who discover that even in the Wild West and in life itself, second chances are always waiting? Share your thoughts in the comments.